The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room fell silent as Jasmine Crockett walked in, her confident stride matching the determined look in her eyes. Just moments earlier, Senator Lindsey Graham had questioned her credentials with a dismissive smirk, saying, "I'm not convinced someone with your background truly understands constitutional law." The comment sent shockwaves through the chamber, with audible gasps from spectators. Crockett, gripping her folder of documents tightly, didn't flinch as millions watched the live stream. Graham, with his decades in the Senate and reputation for sharp questioning, was certain he could outmaneuver this freshman congresswoman from Texas. But Crockett, armed with her legal expertise and unwavering resolve, saw this as her opportunity to set the record straight. As the cameras focused on her face, she stepped toward the microphone, ready to turn this hearing into a moment that would shake Washington to its core. Before we dive deeper into this explosive confrontation, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more political showdowns that the mainstream media won't show you. The committee room buzzed with tension as Senator Lindsey Graham leaned into his microphone, his signature Southern drawl cutting through the air. His blue suit perfectly pressed, his position of power evident in his relaxed posture, a man who had spent decades navigating the highest levels of American politics. The camera caught his confident smile as Chairman Dick Durbin introduced the distinguished senator from South Carolina. Graham wasted no time getting to his point. "Today we're discussing constitutional interpretations that impact every American," he began, his voice measured yet commanding. "And while I respect Representative Crockett's enthusiasm, I must question whether someone with such limited experience truly grasps the historical and legal weight of these matters. After all, we're talking about fundamentals that have shaped our nation for centuries." The Republican side of the committee nodded in agreement, some even chuckling at Graham's thinly veiled dismissal of the freshman congresswoman. Democrats shifted uncomfortably, aware of the attack on their rising star. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett sat straight-backed, her modern burgundy blazer standing out against the sea of traditional blue and gray suits. At 42, the former Texas state representative and civil rights attorney had quickly become known for her direct approach and legal acumen since joining Congress. Though newer to Washington, she brought years of courtroom experience defending constitutional rights in Texas. As Graham spoke, Crockett remained composed, but those who knew her recognized the slight tightening of her jaw, a sign she was preparing for battle, not retreat. Her fingers moved methodically through her documents, tabbing specific pages. "I wonder," Graham continued, looking directly at Crockett, "if the congresswoman can actually explain the constitutional principles at stake here, or if she's simply repeating talking points from her colleagues. After all, I've been studying these issues since before she passed the bar exam, if she ever did." He smiled, seeming pleased with his jab. The implication was clear. Graham wasn't just questioning Crockett's interpretation. He was questioning her qualifications, her credentials, and her right to be taken seriously in this chamber. For the millions watching the live stream, the stakes were immediately apparent. This wasn't just about policy disagreements. This was about respect, legitimacy, and who gets to have a voice in shaping America's legal future. Behind Crockett, her staff exchanged worried glances. Graham's experience in these hearings was legendary. He had verbally sparred with Supreme Court nominees and taken down seasoned politicians. But they had also seen Crockett in action in the Texas courts, where she had never backed down from a fight, especially when her qualifications were questioned. As Chairman Durbin announced, "Representative Crockett, you have 5 minutes to respond." The entire room leaned forward, sensing that what was about to unfold would be more than just another congressional exchange. Graham's attack on Crockett's credentials sparked immediate reactions throughout the hearing room. Several Republican senators nodded in agreement, while Democratic members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Chairman Durbin frowned, tapping his gavel lightly as if considering whether to intervene. Before the congresswoman responds, Graham continued, his southern drawl more pronounced as he warmed to his subject, "I think it's worth noting that these hearings aren't just for theatrical performances. We need substantive legal analysis from people who've actually practiced constitutional law at the highest levels." He looked directly at Crockett. "Not just anyone with a law degree can properly interpret the complexities of our Constitution." The camera caught Senator Ted Cruz leaning over to whisper something to Graham, both men smiling. The microphones didn't pick up their exchange, but their body language suggested shared amusement at Crockett's expense. Chairman Durbin finally intervened. "Senator Graham, I'd appreciate if you'd direct your comments to the substance of the hearing rather than questioning the qualifications of our witnesses." Graham raised his hands in mock surrender. "Mr. Chairman, I'm simply establishing context. If we're going to hear testimony about constitutional interpretation, We should know whether the witness has the background to offer informed opinions. I've spent 30 years studying these issues, clerked for federal judges, and argued before the Supreme Court. I'm just wondering what Representative Crockett brings to the table besides strong opinions. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Several spectators murmured, and a congressional aide rushed a note to Crockett, who barely glanced at it before setting it aside. Her expression remained calm, but those who knew her could see the fire building behind her eyes. Senator Amy Klobuchar leaned toward her microphone. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to point out that Representative Crockett is a licensed attorney with significant courtroom experience in constitutional matters. This line of questioning seems designed to distract from the substance of today's hearing. Graham smiled. I appreciate the senator's defense of her colleague, but I'm not questioning whether Representative Crockett went to law school. I'm questioning whether her experience qualifies her to lecture this committee on constitutional interpretation. There's a difference between passing the bar and truly understanding the historical and legal foundations of our government. The camera panned to Crockett, who was reviewing documents with deliberate calm, seemingly unruffled by Graham's escalating attacks. This apparent composure seemed to irritate Graham further. Look, he continued, his voice rising slightly. I've seen plenty of first-term representatives come into these chambers thinking they understand how government works, only to reveal they've barely read the Constitution they're sworn to defend. When I look at some of the positions Representative Crockett has taken, I have to wonder if she slept through her constitutional law classes, assuming she took them. Several gasps echoed through the chamber. This was no longer subtle questioning. It was a direct attack on Crockett's education and intelligence. Behind Crockett, her chief of staff frantically typed on her phone, likely searching for information to counter Graham's claims. Another aide slid a folder toward Crockett, who again calmly set it aside without opening it, her gaze now fixed directly on Graham. Chairman Durbin's gavel came down more forcefully. Senator Graham, I must insist you direct your comments to the policy matters at hand. Graham nodded but continued, Mr. Chairman, I believe understanding the qualifications of our witnesses is directly relevant to policy matters. The American people deserve to know whether Representative Crockett actually has the legal background to evaluate these issues, or if she's just another politician with opinions but no expertise. The camera caught Crockett reaching for her water glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip. To viewers, she appeared unbothered, which seemed to further agitate Graham. In fact, Graham added, leaning forward, I'd like to know where exactly Representative Crockett got her law degree. Was it from a top-tier school where constitutional law is rigorously taught, or was it from somewhere less demanding? Because from what I've heard about her legal interpretations, I have serious doubts about the quality of her education. The room erupted in reactions, Democrats objecting loudly, Republicans watching with interest, staffers frantically checking phones and whispering to their bosses. Social media was already exploding with clips of Graham's questioning, with hashtags like #GrahamAttacksCrockett and #DefendCrockett starting to trend. Chairman Durbin's gavel came down hard this time. That's enough, Senator Graham. Representative Crockett is a duly elected member of Congress and a licensed attorney. Her credentials are not the subject of this hearing. Graham sat back, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. He had successfully created the impression that Crockett's legal background was questionable, an impression that would stick unless forcefully countered. As Durbin turned to Crockett announcing, Representative Crockett, you now have the floor to respond. All eyes turned to the Congresswoman. The air in the room felt electric with anticipation. Would she lose her cool and play into Graham's hands? Would she be intimidated into a defensive posture? Or did she have something else entirely planned? Crockett stood, adjusting her microphone with a steady hand. The cameras caught her composed expression, revealing no hint of the anger or defensiveness Graham had clearly hoped to provoke. Instead, there was something else in her eyes, a calculated determination that suggested Graham might have seriously underestimated his opponent. Representative Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat, straightening her burgundy blazer as she moved to the microphone. The room fell into a hushed silence, everyone waiting to see how she would respond to Graham's blistering attack on her credentials. Instead of immediately speaking, she took a moment to survey the room, her gaze finally settling directly on Graham. This wasn't the nervous hesitation of someone overwhelmed, it was the measured pause of a seasoned attorney preparing to deliver a closing argument. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Crockett began, her voice clear and unwavering. Before I address the substantive policy questions that are actually the subject of today's hearing, I feel compelled to correct some mischaracterizations of my background that Senator Graham seems fixated on. She smiled slightly, but there was nothing submissive in her expression. Senator Graham has repeatedly questioned my legal education and qualifications, so let me set the record straight. I earned my Juris Doctor from the University of Houston Law Center, where I graduated in the top quarter of my class and served as an editor on the Houston Journal of International Law. Graham shifted in his seat, his smile faltering slightly. This wasn't the defensive, emotional response he had expected. After passing the Texas bar exam on my first attempt, Crockett continued, I spent over a decade practicing law, including extensive work in civil rights litigation, specifically focused on constitutional violations. I've argued and won cases in state and federal courts throughout Texas, and I've successfully challenged unconstitutional statutes that infringed on citizens' rights. The camera caught several Democratic senators nodding in approval, while some Republican members looked less comfortable than they had moments before. But since Senator Graham seems particularly concerned about my understanding of constitutional law, Crockett said, reaching for a folder her aide had prepared, I'd like to draw his attention to a few specifics. She opened the folder with deliberate calm. In 2018, I successfully argued Hendricks v. State before the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, where I demonstrated that a warrantless search violated my client's Fourth Amendment rights, a case now cited in Texas criminal procedure textbooks. In 2019, I won Davis v. Midland County, establishing that a local ordinance violated both First Amendment speech protections and 14th Amendment equal protection guarantees. Graham's expression had changed completely. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped stare. This clearly wasn't going according to his plan. But perhaps most relevant to today's discussion, Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength without rising in volume, in 2020, I successfully argued Moore v. Texas Department of Public Safety, where the court agreed with my constitutional analysis that a state regulation violated the Dormant Commerce Clause, precisely the constitutional issue we're discussing today. She closed the folder and set it aside, never breaking eye contact with Graham. So yes, Senator Graham, I do understand constitutional law. I've not only studied it, I've successfully practiced it, establishing precedents that protect Americans' rights. The room had fallen completely silent, all attention riveted on Crockett. Even Chairman Durbin seemed transfixed by her composed dismantling of Graham's attack. Now, Crockett said, her voice taking on a different tone, I find it curious that Senator Graham felt the need to question my legal credentials rather than engaging with the substance of my arguments. In my experience as a trial attorney, that approach typically signals one thing: a weak position on the merits. Audible gasps echoed through the chamber. Crockett wasn't just defending herself, she was turning the tables completely. But since the senator opened this door, she continued, reaching for a second folder, I took the liberty of reviewing his own legal career before he entered politics. Graham's face flushed visibly, his eyes widening in apparent surprise. Senator Graham graduated from the University of South Carolina School of Law in 1981, Crockett stated, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. He then served primarily as a military lawyer in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, a respectable career path certainly. However, according to public records, in his time before entering Congress, Senator Graham never argued a case before the Supreme Court, as he implied earlier. The room erupted in murmurs. Graham leaned toward his microphone, but Crockett continued before he could interrupt. Additionally, while the senator claimed to have clerked for federal judges, public records indicate he served as a military prosecutor and defense counsel, not as a judicial clerk. These are entirely different roles, with different responsibilities. Graham's face had turned a deep red. On the Democratic side, several senators were visibly trying to suppress smiles. Furthermore, Crockett said, pulling a document from the folder, I have here the transcript from the senator's remarks last month at Georgetown Law, where he stated, and I quote, constitutional law was never my favorite subject in law school. I was more interested in criminal procedure. The chamber erupted in reaction. Laughter from some, shocked expressions from others. Graham was now furiously writing notes, presumably preparing for a rebuttal. Crockett's voice cut through the commotion, still controlled but with unmistakable intensity. To be clear, I'm not questioning Senator Graham's intelligence or his right to participate in this discussion. I would never stoop to such tactics. I'm simply pointing out that his attempt to dismiss my qualifications appears to be based more on assumption and prejudice than on fact. She paused, letting her words sink in. The entire committee was now hanging on her every word. But perhaps most troubling, Crockett continued, her voice now carrying a note of genuine concern, is the senator's apparent belief that only certain types of legal education or experience count as valid. This reminds me of arguments I've heard in courtrooms when opposing counsel couldn't challenge the substance of my case, the suggestion that somehow I didn't belong there, that my presence was an anomaly rather than a right. The camera caught several black female staffers in the background nodding in recognition. "I wonder," Crockett said, her gaze sweeping the room before returning to Graham, "if the senator would have felt the need to question the legal credentials of someone who looked different from me, or came from a different background. I wonder if he realizes how familiar his tactics are to any woman of color who has excelled in spaces where some still believe we don't belong." The silence in the room was absolute. Graham's expression had transformed from anger to something that looked remarkably like embarrassment. "Now," Crockett said, returning to her notes with a deliberate shift in tone, "if the senator is genuinely interested in discussing constitutional interpretation rather than engaging in personal attacks, I'm prepared to address the actual subject of today's hearing." She then launched into a detailed analysis of the constitutional issues at hand, citing Supreme Court precedents, original intent arguments, and historical context. Her command of the subject matter was immediately apparent, her explanations clear and precise without talking down to her audience. 3 minutes into this portion of her response, Graham attempted to interrupt, leaning toward his microphone with a "Madam Representative, if I may." Chairman Durbin immediately cut in. "The representative has the floor, Senator Graham. You'll have your chance to respond afterward." Crockett nodded in acknowledgement but didn't break stride in her constitutional analysis. For the next several minutes, she outlined her position with the practiced clarity of someone who had indeed spent years in courtrooms making complex legal arguments accessible to judges and juries. As she concluded her substantive remarks, she returned briefly to the personal attack that had started it all. "Senator Graham suggested earlier that I might have slept through constitutional law classes. I can assure the senator I was wide awake, as I am now. The question is whether he was listening then, or is listening now, to voices that don't match his preconceptions of what legal expertise looks like." Looking directly at Graham, she delivered her final line. "I don't need you to validate my law degree, Senator Graham. My clients, the courts, the voters, and my record have already done that. The real question today isn't about my qualifications. It's about whether your arguments can stand on their own merits without resorting to unfounded personal attacks." With that, she sat down, arranging her papers calmly as the room erupted. Chairman Durbin had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. The cameras caught the expressions around the room, stunned respect from many, discomfort from Graham's allies, and barely concealed delight from Crockett's supporters. When order was finally restored, all eyes turned to Graham for his response. But the senator, for perhaps the first time in his long political career, seemed genuinely at a loss for words. The aftershocks of Representative Crockett's devastating takedown of Senator Graham reverberated far beyond the walls of the hearing room. As chairman, Durbin called a brief recess. The scene inside became a flurry of activity. Democratic staffers exchanging astonished glances, Republican aides huddling in urgent consultation with their bosses, and journalists frantically typing on their phones, racing to break the story of what they'd just witnessed. Outside the committee room, social media was already exploding. Within minutes, clips of Crockett's methodical dismantling of Graham's attack had been uploaded, shared, and viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The hashtag number Crockett Schools Graham shot to the top of trending topics, soon joined by number Law School 101 and number Never Question Her Credentials. A prominent legal commentator with over 800,000 followers tweeted, "Just watched Rep. Crockett give Sen Graham an education in constitutional law and fact-checking." This isn't just a clapback. It's a masterclass in turning an unfair attack into a moment of genuine public education. The post quickly accumulated over 50,000 likes and 15,000 reposts. A video clip of Crockett saying, "I don't need you to validate my law degree, Senator," became an instant viral moment, with law students and attorneys of color particularly sharing it widely with comments like, "This is how you handle people questioning your right to be in the room," and printing this quote for my office wall. Immediately. When the hearing resumed 30 minutes later, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Graham, typically animated and assertive, seemed subdued. When given the opportunity to respond, he avoided direct mention of Crockett's credentials, instead attempting to redirect the conversation to policy disagreements, a tacit admission that his previous line of attack had backfired spectacularly. "Look, we can have reasonable disagreements about constitutional interpretation," Graham said, his usual confident drawl notably muted. "My concern remains about the approach being advocated here, not about any individual's background." The camera caught several senators exchanging knowing glances at this obvious retreat. Chairman Durbin, maintaining official decorum but with a hint of satisfaction in his voice, thanked Graham and moved the hearing forward. Later that afternoon, Graham faced a barrage of reporters as he exited the Capitol building. "Senator Graham, do you regret questioning Representative Crockett's legal credentials?" shouted one. "Will you apologize for suggesting she slept through law school?" called another. Graham waved off the questions with a tight smile, saying only, "We had a spirited exchange, that's all. It's part of the process," before ducking into a waiting car. Meanwhile, Crockett emerged from the hearing to find herself surrounded by supportive colleagues and media. Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was caught on camera giving her a quick hug, whispering something that made Crockett smile. When reporters asked for her reaction to the exchange with Graham, Crockett maintained her composure. "Today wasn't about me or Senator Graham," she said, her voice measured. "It was supposed to be about vital constitutional questions affecting millions of Americans. I hope that's what people take away from this hearing. The substance matters more than the spectacle." But the spectacle was undeniably reverberating across the political landscape. On CNN's afternoon coverage, legal analyst Joan Biskupic remarked, "What we saw today was extraordinary." Senator Graham, who has built a reputation on his legal background and sharp questioning, essentially challenged Representative Crockett to a legal duel, and she didn't just accept, she disarmed him completely with precision and facts. Fox News took a different approach, with one commentator suggesting Crockett had come prepared with opposition research and questioning whether personal attacks on a senior senator's record served the public interest. However, even on these more conservative outlets, legal experts acknowledge that Graham's initial questioning of Crockett's credentials had opened the door for her response. By evening, the story had made it to the late-night comedy shows. Stephen Colbert opened his monologue with, "Today in Congress, a freshman representative gave a senior senator such a thorough legal education, he's now required to disclose it as a campaign donation." Jimmy Kimmel quipped, "Lindsey Graham learned an important lesson today. Don't bring assumptions to a fact fight." Behind the scenes, the political implications were being carefully assessed. Democratic leadership recognized that Crockett, already seen as a rising star, had just significantly elevated her national profile. By evening, she had gained over 50,000 new followers on social media platforms, and donations to her campaign fund spiked noticeably. For Graham, the miscalculation represented a rare misstep for a politician known for his strategic acumen. Republican strategists privately acknowledged that his attempt to diminish Crockett had not only failed but backfired in a way that might have lasting consequences for his image, particularly among women and minority voters. Legal organizations also weighed in. The National Bar Association, which represents African American lawyers and judges, issued a statement. Today's exchange in the Senate Judiciary Committee highlights the persistent challenges faced by black women attorneys, whose qualifications are routinely questioned despite exceptional credentials and accomplishments. Representative Crockett's response was not just a personal defense but a moment of recognition for countless others who have faced similar unfounded scrutiny. The American Bar Association took a more measured approach, noting, "Robust debate on constitutional interpretation is essential to our democracy, but should be grounded in respect for the qualifications and expertise all participants bring to the table." 3 days after the hearing, Graham issued a carefully worded by-day statement that stopped short of an apology. In the heat of important policy discussions, exchanges can sometimes become more pointed than intended. "I respect Representative Crockett's legal background and look forward to future opportunities to debate the substantive issues facing our nation." Crockett's response came in the form of a simple retweet of leveled Graham's statement, adding only, "I appreciate the acknowledgement. Now, back to the work the American people elected us to do." But the impact continued to ripple outward. Law schools reported sharing clips of the exchange in classes on legal ethics and advocacy. Young lawyers, particularly women of color, described the moment as inspirational. One second-year law student at Howard University told The Washington Post, "Seeing Representative Crockett stand her ground, cite her record, and refuse to be diminished without losing her composure, that's the kind of attorney I aspire to be." Perhaps most significantly, the exchange became a reference point in discussions about who gets questioned in professional settings and why. Opinion pieces in major publications examined how credentials are scrutinized differently depending on who holds them, with Crockett's response held up as a model for addressing such disparities directly but professionally. A week later, when Crockett appeared on Meet the Press, the host inevitably asked about the confrontation with Graham. Crockett's response reflected the perspective she had gained from the national reaction. "What resonated with so many people wasn't about me personally," she said. "It was about recognition. Anyone who has had their qualifications questioned despite proving themselves repeatedly, whether they're a black woman in law like me, or anyone who's been underestimated because of who they are rather than what they know, felt seen in that moment. If that exchange helps change even one person's assumptions about who belongs in which rooms, then something good came from it." The host pressed further. "Has Senator Graham reached out to you personally since the hearing?" Crockett smiled slightly. "We've had a brief conversation. I'll keep the details private, but I believe we both recognize that our jobs are to serve the American people, not to engage in personal conflicts. I'm ready to work with anyone, including Senator Graham, on the substantive issues that actually matter to our constituents." This measured response further elevated Crockett's stature, with political analysts noting how she had transformed what could have been just another viral moment into a substantive conversation about qualifications, respect, and who gets to have a voice in America's most important institutions. For Graham, the incident became a cautionary tale within political circles about the dangers of underestimating opponents based on assumptions rather than facts. As one anonymous Republican strategist told Politico, "Lindsey picked the wrong lawyer to accuse of not understanding the law. He won't make that mistake again, and neither will anyone who watched what happened." The most lasting legacy of the confrontation, however, might be found in law schools and courtrooms across America. A month after the hearing, a federal judge in Georgia was reported to have stopped a male attorney who began questioning his female opposing counsel's understanding of case law. "Counselor," the judge reportedly said, "unless you want to have what I now call a Crockett moment, I suggest you address the substance of her arguments rather than implying she doesn't understand the law." The story of how Representative Jasmine Crockett shut down Senator Lindsey Graham's questioning of her law degree didn't just create a memorable political moment, it changed the conversation about credentials, respect, and who gets questioned in professional spaces. In turning what could have been a humiliating attack into a powerful demonstration of her expertise, Crockett provided a template for responding to unfounded scrutiny with facts, composure, and unquestionable competence. If you found this breakdown of the Crockett-Graham showdown informative, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most explosive political confrontations with in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming video exploring what this clash means for the changing power dynamics in Congress.